I want you to picture something for a second, because the number I'm about to give you isn't just a statistic. It's millions of real kitchens with real people standing in them, holding envelopes they're scared to open. And that's where we have to start today, because the conversation around student debt in this country just shifted in a way that a lot of folks haven't fully absorbed yet. Recent 2026 data points to roughly 2.6 million federal student loan borrowers slipping into official default. And whether that exact figure holds or gets revised, the direction is undeniable, and it's pointed straight at the people who can least afford the fall. Now I'm Kunal, I run Failed Finance, and the reason this channel exists is simple. I'm far more interested in the wreckage than the highlight reel, because the wreckage is where the actual lessons live. So before we go 1 inch further, I want to be clear that nothing I'm sharing is personalized financial advice. I'm not your advisor, and I don't know your specific situation. What I am is somebody who reads the data obsessively and tries to translate it into something you can actually use. So treat this as a starting point for your own homework, not the final. Word. All right, here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. This default wave is not happening because a couple million people suddenly got lazy or stopped caring. That's the lazy explanation, and it's wrong. What actually happened is that the cost of simply existing in America has outrun the wages of an entire generation. Rent in most metros has climbed to levels that would have sounded like a typo 10. Years ago, groceries cost more, insurance costs more, childcare can eat an entire paycheck, and somewhere underneath all of that sits a student loan bill that used to feel manageable, and now feels like the straw the whole budget breaks on. When you're choosing between keeping the lights on and sending money to a loan servicer, the lights win every single time, and that's not a character flaw. That's math. Here's why default is so vicious, though. And this is the part I really need you to understand. The moment a federal loan hits default, it doesn't just sit there quietly. It detonates across your entire financial life. Your credit score takes a brutal hit, sometimes 100 points or more. And that single number quietly controls doors you don't even realize you're walking toward. The apartment you want to rent, the car loan you need to get to work, the interest rate on literally everything you'll ever borrow, even certain jobs that run credit checks. So a kid who fell behind on a loan in their 20s can end up paying for it in their 40s through a higher mortgage rate they never connected back to that original miss. The debt becomes a shadow that follows you, and millennials and Gen Z are the ones standing directly in its path. Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever felt that quiet dread when a bill notification pops up on your phone and you just don't open it? Because you already know. If you have, I want you to drop a word in the comments, just so the next person scrolling realizes they're not the only one. Because the shame around this stuff is half the trap. It keeps people frozen and silent when the very thing that helps is talking and acting. Now this is where Warren Buffett sneaks into the conversation, and not in the way you'd expect. Everybody quotes Buffett on getting rich, but the man's most useful idea for a person in debt is actually about survival. He said the first rule is never lose money, and the second rule is never forget the first rule. And people hear that as advice for investors. But flip it around. When you're in default, the thing bleeding money out of your life is the debt itself. The penalties, the collateral damage to your credit. So applying Buffett's logic to a regular person drowning in loans means your number one job isn't to chase some side hustle dream first. It's to stop the bleeding, plug the hole before you try to fill the bucket. That mental shift alone changes how you prioritize every dollar. And Buffett himself has been candid that some of his worst results came not from bad stocks but from inaction, from sitting frozen when he should have moved. That's the exact mistake I see playing out across this default wave, people freezing instead of moving. So let's talk about moving, because there is a path, and most people in default genuinely don't know it exists. The first and most powerful tool on the federal side is loan rehabilitation. This is a formal program where you make a series of agreed-upon, often surprisingly small monthly payments. And once you complete it, the default status can actually come off your record. That's not a minor thing. That's your credit getting a real shot at recovery. The second tool, and this one is a game changer for cash flow, is the family of income-driven repayment plans. The whole idea behind IDR is that your monthly payment gets tied to what you actually earn instead of some fixed number set by the original loan. For borrowers with low enough income, that monthly payment can drop dramatically, in some cases all the way down towards zero, while you stay in good standing. Sit with that for a second. The difference between a default that's torching your credit and a payment of nearly nothing while you stay protected can come down to a single application most people never fill out. The system isn't advertising these options to you. You have to go reach for them. And I know reaching for them when you're already exhausted and embarrassed feels like one more impossible task, but this is the single highest leverage move available to anyone caught in this. Before we go deeper into the second half, where I want to get into the ripple effects, nobody's pricing in, and the specific steps to take this week, ask yourself one thing. When's the last time you actually looked at what type of loans you have and what programs you qualify for? Because for a lot of you, the answer is never, and that one. Afternoon of looking could be worth more than a year of overtime. What most people miss about a default wave this size is that it doesn't stay contained to the borrowers. It spreads, and understanding the spread is how you protect yourself, even if you personally don't have a student loan. Think about who's exposed when 2.6 million people stop paying. The fintech lenders who built entire businesses on consumer credit suddenly see their loss models break. Student housing. Operators who counted on a generation comfortably taking on debt now face renters who are tapped out and credit damaged. And the consumer credit agencies sit in the middle of all of it, watching the average creditworthiness of an entire age group erode in real time. That erosion doesn't disappear. It gets repriced into the cost of borrowing for everyone, which is the quiet way a crisis that started in one corner ends up reaching into your wallet too. So this isn't just their problem. It's a pressure that moves through the whole system. And I'll be honest with you, watching this build is exactly the kind of slow-motion failure that made me start failed finance in the first place. I'd rather we stare directly at it than pretend it away. All right, let's get practical, because awareness without action is just anxiety with extra steps. Here's what I'd actually do this week if I were in or near default. Step 1, find out precisely what you owe and to whom. Pull your federal loan details from the official federal student aid system. Not some random third-party site. You need the real picture, the loan types, the balances, the servicer, because every solution depends on knowing exactly what you're working with. Step 2, if you're already in default, call your servicer and say the specific words loan rehabilitation. Ask them to walk you through the agreement and what your monthly figure would be. And here's a real example of how small it can get. Rehabilitation payments are based on your discretionary income. So for someone with a modest paycheck, that negotiated payment can land far lower than the original bill that buried them. Step 3, if you're not yet in default but you're scared you're heading there, get ahead of it and apply for an income-driven repayment plan now, before you miss the payment that starts the avalanche. Prevention here is 100 times easier than rehabilitation later. Step 4, and people skip this one constantly. Build a tiny buffer even while you're in repayment. I'm not talking about some massive emergency fund. I'm talking about getting even a few $100s set aside so the next surprise car repair doesn't knock you back into default, because the people who climb out and stay out are almost always the ones who left themselves a little margin. Let me give you a quick composite picture of how this plays out. Imagine someone. Call her a 29-year-old in a mid-size American city, teaching job, decent heart, drowning balance. She ignored the letters for months out of pure dread. Finally, she spent one Sunday pulling her real numbers, called about rehabilitation, got onto an income-driven plan, and her payment dropped to a fraction of what was crushing her. 6 months later, her default status was on its way off her record, and for the first time in years, she wasn't bracing every time her phone buzzed. Nothing magic happened. She just stopped freezing and started moving. That's the entire difference. And it ties right back to Buffett's point about how inaction is its own decision, and usually the most expensive one. Now I want to hear from you, because this channel works best as a conversation. If you've ever used rehabilitation or an income-driven plan, tell us. Below what actually happened, was the process smoother or worse than you expected? Your 2 sentences in the comments might be the exact nudge that pushes someone else to finally make the call. And if this whole breakdown made even one piece of this clearer, that's what failed finance is here for. The failures, the recoveries, and the unglamorous moves in between. One last thing before you go, and I mean this sincerely. The worst financial mistakes I've ever watched people make weren't reckless bets. They were silent surrenders. People who had options sitting right in front of them and never reached for them because they were too tired or too ashamed to look. Don't be that story. The data on this default wave is heavy, but your individual situation is not as fixed as it feels at 2 a.m. when the bills are stacked on the table. There are real levers here, real programs built for exactly this moment, and the single bravest thing you can do is open the envelope, look at the real number, and take the first small step, because the gap between staying stuck and getting free is almost never as wide as the fear makes it look.